I met her, we lived in that community, and I knew her family and went to school with several of her brothers.
Did you have brothers?
Yes,
How many?
I have one,
Is he older or younger?
younger.
Is he still living?
Yes, I was the oldest child, and then there were three sisters, and my brother, A.D., Arnold, was the youngest.
A.D. Did those initials stand for anything?
Yes, Arthur Douglas. He was named after my father. Initials.
And the names of your sisters?
The oldest one is Ruth, and the middle one is named Evelyn, and the youngest one is Kathleen.
Are they still living?
Yes, they're still living.
Where do they live?
Uh, Kathleen Rasco lives here in Tyler, and Evelyn lives in Arandis Pass, down close to Corpus Christi. And
That's Evelyn, two sisters?
yes, Evelyn, she's the one that lives in Arandis Pass near Corpus Christi.
Did I miss one sister? I thought you had three sisters.
I have three.
Which one did I miss?
Ruth McCary,
Ruth.
and she is now in
Okay.
Park Place Rest Home.
Would you say you were a close family?
Yes.
Were you all educated through high school together?
Well, they were through high school. We didn't go to college.
Did you attend school in Abilene at any time?
Now,
Abilene, Texas.
I went to school there in 1917 and 18.
What
In
kind of
high school.
Oh, that was the high school.
Yes.
How far is Abilene from the area, from the community you were raised in, born and raised in?
Well, it's about 260 miles.
How did you end up going to school so far away?
Well, we lived there for 2 years during 19 and I believe it was 17 and 18.
What took your family to that area?
My father was a contractor, building contractor, and he did some work there during that time, building houses.
How did you travel from your home place to that area?
On the Texas and Pacific. It went from Bladewater through Dallas, Fort Worth, and on west to Abilene.
That must have been really quite exciting to pack up the family and head to
It was.
parts unknown.
Yes.
What do you remember about that time?
Well, of course, Abilene was much larger than Bladewater. And I was in high school there at that time and enjoyed it very much.
Did you hate to leave your friends?
Oh, yes, sure did.
But you still wanted the adventure of traveling with your family.
Yes, that was quite an adventure.
Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, I was raised in the country, lived in Bladewater several years, and of course that was a much larger city, and it was quite interesting taking a train trip that far.
Do you remember pressing your nose to the window and watching the landscape as you left your home place?
Well, after we got out beyond Dallas and Fort Worth, we were on a train that was real crowded, and there were very few seats. And I sat on the arm of the seat with my mother and sisters, and we got way on out west of Fort Worth, and I remember the coaches were open, and I stood on the steps of the coach hanging to the bar just watching the country. And that was quite interesting. That's a big open country, you know.
What do you recall seeing when you first arrived in that big town, when the train was slowing down and people were getting their luggage?
It was night when we got there.
Night.
About 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Tired and sleepy.
Yes, quite a bit.
Where'd you go to sleep that night?
Dad had been out there working for some time building houses, and he had a house rented, and we had some furniture there that we had to sleep on that night.
So your father had the place ready for you. Was he
Yes,
there?
that's right.
So you left with your mother and your sisters and brothers.
Yeah.
So your mother had to take care of you
Oh, yes.
all by herself.
Well, all of us, of course. Then
You were quite a young man, though.
yeah, I was about 16, 17 years old.
How soon did you marry after leaving high school?
Well, let's see, I finished high school in 1922 and married in 1931.
1931. Now, it was 1925, I think you said that you started work the first time for the city of Tyler.
Yes.
What brought you from Abilene to Tyler?
Well, the family moved back to Gladewater, and we were there a while, and Dad was building over here, so we moved the family over here.
Did it feel natural to you to go into the building industry for your first job? Was it natural for you to do that? Is that something you looked forward to as your first job?
When I left high school, 1922, I went to Port Arthur and went to work for the Texas Company, Texas Oil Company, and worked down there one summer. And then I came back to home with the people here in Gladewater, and I had worked during the summer for a road construction bridge builder.
How did you get that job?
I worked during the summer out of high school for him. He employed some young men there to help him.
Is this someone you knew?
Well, he was a contractor from out of town somewhere, but I got acquainted with him and tried to make him a good hand. And when I came back here, he wanted to go back to work for him again.
What made a good hand in those days?
Well, being able to build forms and pour concrete and you'd shovel mud and everything that came up.
Is that something you learned from watching your father, or did you have to really be trained
No,
to do that?
I did some carpenter work I learned from my father, but when I came back from Port Arthur, he wanted me to go work for him, and he had a job on the highway south of Marshall, Texas. So I moved down there, and I was foreman on the concrete crew that built culverts and
How old
bridges.
were you at that time?
That was 19 and 23. I was about 20 years old.
20 years old and a foreman.
Yes, I had a little experience in the summertime, working for, as I said, a construction man. But anyway, worked there partly as a laborer, but just doing everything that was needed to help build culverts and bridges.
How long did that last?
Uh,
You said that was about 1923.
19 and 23,
And
and I worked for him until about the latter part of 1924. And then I got a job with another contractor that was building concrete culverts and bridges. And I worked on the highway from Shreveport towards Marshall. From Marshall to Shreveport, over to the county line. And then I worked on highway north of Gilmer up towards Pittsburgh. We built some culverts, bridges up there. And worked over in, let's see, where else?
so you were still in that Marshall area, say up to 1924. How did you go from there to the city of Tyler?
Well, of course, I was rooming at some people out in the country close to where we were working. And when I came back to Tyler and got a job, he finished a job there, and I came back to Tyler where the family was, and I got a job of construction work here, laying some water pipe.
Before you go on with that, you say you were rooming. Was that rather typical for young men to do at that time?
Well, yes, I was working out on the road, way out away from home, and you would room and board with some family that would do that.
How did you find the family that you'd room with? Ad in the newspaper, word of mouth?
No, I was working along there and was inquiring about a place to live, and they referred me to this family, and I made contact with them, and they agreed to rent me a room, bed, and board, and so
Did your mother or father give you any advice as a young man on your own? Did they tell you to beware of anything in particular in those days?
Not particularly. My father and mother had always taught me something that's guided me through my life, and that was to tell the truth and and help others. And that's what I was trying to do, is tell the truth everywhere I went.
That's not as easy as it sounds. Helping others, that certainly could be beneficial to you. I can certainly see that. But telling the truth sometimes can be very difficult. It's often said that people do not want to hear the truth.
Well, sometimes that's right.
How did you manage to keep your balance and your position and your respect when you had to tell someone the
Well,
awful truth?
I just told the truth as it was.
And they had to accept it.
Yeah.
1925, I think you said that was the first job you had with the city of Tyler.
Yes.
Was that something special? Was that like a promotion?
No, that was kind of a labor job. I had been in the construction business, and I got a job with the city laying water pipe.
Laying water pipe. Was it only for the city of Tyler?
Yes,
City folks.
City of Tyler owned the water system.
Mm-hmm. What was that like?
Ma'am?
What was that like, laying pipe? What were those pipes made of?
Well, they were cast iron water pipes, what they were, and they joined together with bell and flange, and you had to melt tape and put in there and pack it to keep the pipe from leaking water.
Are those the pipes that came from a place like Tyler Pipe?
No, the Tyler pipe wasn't here at that time.
Mm-hmm. Where those pipes come from?
I don't know, they were shipped in from somewhere.
So you were you partially responsible for helping to load them and actually putting them in place?
Mostly putting them in place. Some others came out, and that was a temporary job, they told me. And then I was transferred to the engineering department with the city of Tyler.
What year was that?
The latter part of 1923.
Okay.
And they told me that job would last through the spring. And during that time, Tyler voted a big bond issue for paved streets. And that's when we started paving streets with brick.
That's interesting. I think it was the 1920s in the photographic exhibit in the museum here. There's a headline that says something about the 15-mile paving the 15 miles. What was it about?
Yeah. Well, when I started working for the city, the paved streets were around the square, and North Spring down to the depot. That was the main drag, as we call it. Everybody came in on a train mostly those days. The highway was not so good. And then we started paving streets from where the pavement ended on South Broadway, I believe at Elm, and South Cottage at Elm, and West Irwin at Bodart, and paved all the streets out through the residential section.
Sounds like quite a job.
It was. Of course, that was done by letting a contract. The contractor bid and was awarded the contract for paving so many streets, so many miles of streets.
Now, what was your actual role in the paving? What was your job? What kinds of things did you do on that 15-mile stretch?
Well, I worked on that not too long, and when I was in the engineering department, I was on the street inspecting laying of brick and so on, and they asked me to stay in the office as office manager in the office. It had a crew that looked after the brick and did all the surveying and did the surveying for water lines and sewer lines and all that, and I got to be the office manager, helping assign these crews. And
how old were you? How old were you?
I was about 21 and 2.
That seems to be quite a bit of responsibility for a young man.
Well,
I mean, did you feel prepared? What about weren't there older men working in that job?
Yes, my boss, J.P. Farrell, was with the city 45 years, and he was a very nice man. He was an engineer, and I had been on about 3.5 years of construction work.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a city engineer and director of public works. And my 3.5 years on construction work, he was the man that had charge of that, and he appointed me to help with the construction.
Why do you think he appointed you? Again, that seems to be a lot of
Well,
responsibility.
he just asked me to serve in that capacity.
Did you have any special talent, do you think? I know you're being modest, but did you have any special talents that he saw?
Well, he thought I was capable of working in the office and handling the office routine at that time.
How did you feel about going from the outdoor job to an indoor white-collar type
Well, I
position?
didn't like it for a while, but
Mm.
I went ahead with that, and he was director of public works, and he appointed me. I was his assistant because I had had 3.5 years of construction work.
Mm-hmm. And you were living in Tyler at the time?
Yes.
Were you with your family or in a rooming house?
No, my family moved over here.
Mm-hmm.
When I left Blakewater in 1922 and went to Port Arthur, the family moved to Tyler during that time.
You know, were all the
And
children
when I came back, of course, I lived with them.
were all the children single at that time, unmarried?
Yes.
Who was the first to marry?
My older sister.
What was courtship like? Do you remember her courting days?
Well,
Was it very stiff and formal? Were they introduced to church, perhaps?
Yes, they went to the same church.
What kind of-
They met. And, of course, going to the picture show was quite an outing back in those days.
Mm-hmm. What's one of the movies that you enjoyed? What was your first movie? Do you remember? That really captured your imagination?
I don't remember the name of it, but it was in Blakewater. And behind some buildings, there was an open space. And they put up some concrete blocks about 10 or 12 feet apart and put some 2x4s on those for seats, and they had a whole row of them. And the first movie I ever saw, the camera was back here, one of those old kind, you know, that he'd put the film in and roll and come to a race, man, he could just wind that good. But that was the first movie. I don't remember anything about the name of it. But,
Who did you go to the movies with? Were you there with your brothers?
I was just a kid, young man, single. Went with the family, so.
With the family. When was your first date?
First date,
Mm-hmm.
Lord have mercy.
Was your wife your first date?
No, let's see, first date was in Longview. I had a cousin that knew a girl over there. And he invited me to go over there with him and date this girl that was her sister.
What were her qualifications? Why did he suggest this particular girl?
Well, just,
Was she especially attractive,
no,
smart,
I
good
don't
look?
remember much about her now. But I remember we went over there and knocked on the door, and he went in, and I came in right behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And he introduced me to his mother, and his mother was a little lady about that big. She looked up at me and said, "You'll sure be a lot of help when you get grown, to a lot of help to your mother when you get grown."
What do you think she meant by that?
Well, I was so tall.
Just so
She was
tall,
a little-
getting cans off the
Yeah.
top shelves, that sort of
She
thing?
was a little bitty lady, and I was about as tall as I am now,
How tall is that?
about 6'1".
You must have stood out then.
Oh, yes.
How did that make you feel?
Well, there were several other men, boys I was with that nearly that tall.
Did the ladies especially like that, the young girls? Did they
I don't-
find you attractive?
I don't remember much about who they were then or how they looked. Or,
But do you think that you were attractive to young girls at that time?
oh, I don't know. I was just a big old country boy.
But with a good job,
Yeah.
smart? How did you meet your wife?
Well, as I said, I knew the family. They lived in the community where we did when she was just little.
So you kind of grew up together? Or you just knew
No.
her off and on?
No, I knew the family, they lived in the community there, and they moved to Gilmer, and, I went to school, as I told you, with her brothers, and,
So you went to school with them and you knew the family. Did that mean that you visited with them occasionally, perhaps?
well, in the community, we usually met at church, you know, and,
Mm-hmm.
she was just a little thing then.
Mm-hmm.
I'm about 7 years older than she is,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just a young fella, and, I went to school with her brothers, and she was one of the youngest children.
When did you really begin to notice her? After you left high school?
Oh, that was years after high school.
I saw photographs. You make a very fine couple, very lovely wedding
Well, I
pictures.
didn't know anything about her. I came over here and they went to Gilmer. I didn't see them anymore till she came over here about 1924, I guess, was living with her sister.
Mm-hmm. Was her sister married?
Yes,
Mm-hmm. And she lived with her sister to be in the big city?
well, she lived with her sister.
Was,
Yeah.
was there a particular reason for that?
Yes, she worked at one of the variety stores here. I kid my wife a lot about being nearly 7 years older than she is, and who's the smartest. I was going to school when she was born.
Who is the smartest?
I mean, not going to school when she was born, but,
You'd already started school.
yes, I was going to school when she was born, that's what I mean.
Did you have to build great bridges to reach her? Were you attracted to her always?
Well, after we met here and started going with her, we went together then until 31 when we married.
So you've been working for, what's that, 5 or maybe 7, 8 years steadily before you actually married.
Oh, yeah.
So you were ready to settle down and build a home for yourself with your wife.
Yes. I worked many years. I went to work, as I said, for a contractor when I was about 17 or 18 during the summer, going to school in the winter. And that's when I worked on culverts and bridges.
Okay, and you were so involved with this that you had a lot of experience, and that's probably the reason you were selected to become the office manager at that
Yes,
time.
that's right.
You said you,
I had some experience, and
would you say that was the key job that helped launch your career?
well, I'd say so, yes.
Who was your mentor? Who helped you? Was there a father figure other than your father?
Well, I had, as I said a while ago, my boss with the city, J.P. Farrell, he was
Carol.
engineer for the city of Tyler and director of public works.
Well, he really liked you, but he also must have trusted your abilities. So you were always learning as you went on. You knew
Yes,
what was
and,
going on in the field.
Since I, as I said a while ago, since I had 3.5 years of construction,
Mhm.
he asked me to serve as assistant director of public works.
How long did that last?
Oh,
A few years?
no, I served as assistant to him, 30 years, I guess.
30 years. Was your job title always the same in that 30 years, or did you change jobs and job titles?
Oh, yes, I was office manager a while, and then
Then you became,
office engineer.
what year did you become office engineer?
About, I don't know, middle 20s, a little after.
Somewhere near between 1925 and 1930.
Yes.
City engineer, was that much different from being an office manager? What was different? What's an engineer?
Well, of course, an engineer had charge of all the engineering functions of the city. Had 2 or 3 crews that did all the surveying and engineering work for laying, as I said, water and sewer lines, giving grades for curb and gutter and paving streets and inspecting and so on.
At the building inspecting, I remember you were telling me something about a party wall, which I found interesting. Tell us about a party wall.
Well, a party wall we refer to around the square, a lot of those buildings, a party wall where there's a property line. A party wall is one wall that's built sufficient width to hold the building and everything, but the division line is right in the middle of the wall. That's a party wall, two parties on that wall. And some places up there, one building built theirs right on the line, and then when the other one got ready to build, he had to build another one, see, right on that line.
I gather that was somewhat unusual or routine.
Well, it depends on the people.
How common would you say that was at the time?
Well, quite a few of them had party walls because they built the buildings, even though they were different owners, they built the buildings sufficient width and strength to hold the roof and everything of both buildings.
Is that something you can still find in Tyler today? Can
Yes,
you
some
locate
of the
those?
old buildings around the square that way.
Would you say that's fairly unique for Tyler?
No,
No, it is not, so it's rather common for
a lot of places do that.
Do you know the buildings today that still have those old party walls?
I couldn't tell you a lot of them, no, but
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the foundation on some of them where they tore one building down, which was a bank building, and built a new one, and they built another wall right up by that.
Speaking of tearing old buildings down, you were involved, I think, early on in trying to save one of the old firehouses. Did they
Yes.
tear it down eventually?
Yes, they tore it down.
Why did you want to save that building so badly?
Well, it was a good building structurally.
Mm-hmm.
You remember the old fire station,
Yes.
Dad?
Yes, I have a lot of fond memories of that place.
Yeah, that's right. That was a good building structurally, and Ripley said it was the tallest two-story building in the
I'm
world.
glad you brought that up. You know, after you told me that the first time, I said, tallest two-story building. And then I thought, what does that mean? What is the tallest two-story building? I still don't understand that idea.
Well, a two-story building, you put the second floor and then the roof,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the height of the building up to the wall, top of the walls. And this building was built tall walls all around it, and they had a second floor right over the fire department where they slept.
Mm-hmm.
They slept over with some of the fire trucks, and they had a pole, you know, that
Mm-hmm.
go down and go. And then part of it was an auditorium up there that they had stair steps to it.
And again, that was the tallest two-story building.
Yes.
How tall were the walls? I'm still having a problem picturing that.
I expect over 40 feet.
How did it find its way into Ripley's, believe it or not?
I don't know.
Let's see, when was that, about 1956 or so?
That's when it was torn down.
Oh, that's when it was torn down.
It
How-
was built in 1908.
Oh, 1908. Why do you think whoever decided to tear it down in 1956, such a structurally sound building, and apparently there were lots of fond memories of it, why did you lose it?
Well, there was no use for it as far as the way it was arranged inside.
What about for historical reasons?
Well, it held the fire trucks, and it had some office space, but it wasn't well arranged at all.
Well arranged. I mean, not convenient for its use, it was not functional?
Well, that's right, because the water department was in front, you had to go through the part of the tax department and then part of the, to get back to the engineering department, there were several offices there that were, you had to go through one or the other to get out.
What street was that on?
That was on North College and Locust.
And Locust. It sounded as though there were a number of very saddened people by that. Do you have reconstructions or models of it? Where's some photographs of that firehouse?
Oh, there's a lot of them.
There are.
Yeah, I've got some.
What are some of your fondest memories of some of the buildings here? And
Well,
which,
back to this building now. Our office, the engineering department, was on the north end of the building. And the fire department, the trucks were on the south side. And we could hear the alarm a lot of times when the fire alarm came in. And I know several of the boys used to get a thrill out of running through there, these offices, and jumping on the back of the fire trucks and going out with them. That was quite a fun until one time we did that, and we went out on West Houston, and that was a big fire, and they made us drag hose and everything by car out there for 2 or 3 hours.
Put you to work.
That kind of broke up there.
Well, not really, because later on you became a volunteer fireman, did you not?
No,
No?
volunteer fireman, I don't remember.
Okay. You did do a lot of volunteering, though, or you were volunteered, as you like to say.
Yeah.
What are some of those jobs you were volunteered for?
Oh, Lord, I was volunteered
You name it?
help with the Director of Public Works, which had charge of the warehouse, and that contained the street department and the different departments of the city, and we had to oversee those.
And you were doing that at the same time you had a full-time job?
Well, that was before I was detailed to the office altogether.
All right. So that was about what year that you were in charge?
Mid-20s, I guess, I don't remember.
You had lots of responsibilities in the 20s for such a young man.
Well, I tried to serve where I could, where I got volunteered for.
Where you got volunteered?
But over the years, I've got volunteered for many, many things. They asked me to, Jack, you remember this East Texas Council of Government? Covers 14.
I certainly heard of it. Certainly.
Covers 14 counties here. They asked me to help organize that, and I had to go to the county judges and commissioners of these 14 counties and talk to them about becoming a council of governments. And the first thing was, no, we don't want anything to do with that. That'll be another taxing level. So we had to overcome that, and we finally convinced them that it was better to have one council of governments here in this 14 counties where they could cooperate on many things. They could cooperate on purchasing power if they wanted to. In other words, 5 cities could buy much cheaper fire hose for the county than the county could buy maybe 100 to 2 feet. And I helped with that. City manager and some of the commission went with me tonight.
You were a salesman and a diplomat.
Well, I tried to do what I could.
You're much too modest. You said yourself that that was a really big job to get these 4 counties to cooperate.
14 counties.
14 counties.
Yes.
That's a lot of people.
Well, it is. As I said, we had to go, not all me, but some of the council and the manager, and we'd meet with the county judges and commissioners of these different counties.
How did you finally persuade them on this idea?
Well, just by going to them and talking to them.
Plain common sense.
Mhm.
It's just cheaper. It makes more sense.
We started that, having the council of governments, and Longview wanted to have a council of governments, Longview and Marshall, and we went over and talked to them, and after a lot of discussion, the councilman here and the city manager talking to them finally decided that it would be well to do that. And we didn't want the office for the council of government to be in Longview, and Longview didn't want it in Tyler. And that's the reason it's located in Kilgore is there now. That's where the office has been all the time.
So Kilgore had no objections.
Oh no, glad to have it because they employ several people in that department.
We're gonna pause for a moment.
Oops.
Oh, Blackstone Hotel, yes.
Yeah, that's the old Blackstone.
You got any stories about the Blackstone? We're back after about a 10-minute break. When we were last talking, Mr. Arnold, you were talking about the East Texas Council of Governors. And,
Council of Government,
oh, government, thank you for that correction, East Texas Council of Government.
yes.
And I still think that that must have been a really big selling job to get those 14 counties to cooperate.
Well, it took several, it took several meetings with the city manager and commission and so on of the counties getting together and understanding what it was and what it was for.
Okay, now you said you were part of a team then,
Yes.
in the efforts to form this association. What did you, as an individual, bring to that team?
Well, I was known in this area, and I would go to and talk to the city manager or county judge and explain to them what we were doing and get them acquainted with the program, and he in turn would then get his commission or managers together.
So they knew they could trust you, what you said, because your parents had always advised you to tell the truth. So they know that whatever you were telling them
Mm-hmm.
was valid.
Yes. That's one thing my parents did, always taught me to believe in God, tell the truth, and help others.
How long did it take you to persuade those counties to finally come together?
I don't remember, it took several meetings that, not only me, but as I said, the
Right.
city manager was with us and some of the councilmen at different times. And
What year was that about?
it was 1970 to 71.
Okay, now that's quite late in your career. You know, during the break, we were walking around your photo exhibit there, and before we get too far, I wanted to mention your son, and that is the only child you have, is that correct? There was a photograph of you and a young man, you
Oh,
said was
yeah.
your son,
Mhm.
and his name is Milton.
Milton,
Where's Milton today?
he's here.
How old is Milton?
Let's see, he was born in 1937.
And from Tyler?
Yes, we lived here when he was
Tyler
born.
Wright. Did he follow in his father's footsteps?
No, he has some businesses of his own that he is in.
Did you encourage him to take a different road?
Well, that's what he liked.
So that was important to you
Mhm.
for your son to do what he liked. Your parents must have been proud of you.
Well, I guess all parents are.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, generally, most of them are, yeah.
I know, but you're being very modest now, but looking at the photographic exhibit there, 1920s, you did a number of really interesting things, and I'm thinking of one photograph I saw with the airplane landing. Was that about 1920 as well, in that decade?
No, that was, let's see, 1926 or 7.
Okay, so it wasn't that time frame. You were telling me that was the first plane to land in Texas, in Tyler,
No, at that Pounds
at the
Field.
Pounds Field. How did you get word of that? Who told you about it?
Well, I don't remember, but the crew that we were with, O.C. Palmer owned the plane. He was a pilot in the war, and he owned the plane, and he kept it on the east side of South Broadway, about where 4th and 5th Street are. And he flew right across where Montgomery Ward Building and Brookshire Grove Street, and Standpipe wasn't there at that time. And he took off from there and landed on what's now part of the airport property, and that was when he landed there that afternoon.
That must have been really exciting.
Yes, quite a bit.
You had a little accident there. What happened before the plane arrived, and before the
Oh,
photographers
I'd
came?
been out in the woods and tore the knee out of my trousers there, and I had to step behind a person as a reason.
That's why you're standing slightly behind someone
Just a
that.
little, yeah. But that was known, the first plane when it was gonna land, and the city manager and the council and a number of people were out there, some ex-councilmen and so on were out there to be there at the
That
time,
must-
and that's when that picture was made.
Sure, that must have been a really incredible day. Do you remember anything about that day? Did you celebrate very much afterwards, talking
No.
about that plane? No big deal, huh?
So
Routine.
we began to build an airport. We just had a gravel runway
Oh, so
when he
you
landed
worked
there.
on building an
And
airport?
then, that was on a 400-acre tract, and, then the city began to buy more property, and we finally wound up with over 850 acres, I believe, and built all over west of that where the terminal is now, and where the present runways are.
Now, who was the we at that time? Who were you working with at
I
that?
mean, the city.
The city. What was your position at that time? What was your job?
Well, I was Director of Public Works most of that time.
And this was a paid position, and you did some volunteer work in that area as well?
No, this was, I was paid working for the city, and this was part of the city project.
Part of the
doing
city,
that,
uh-huh.
yes.
Uh-huh.
But I used to get volunteered to help with this, just like I said about organizing this East Texas Council of Government. And
They take you away from home a lot?
at night, the city manager and sometimes some of the city council would meet with these city managers or county judges and county commissioners and get them familiar with what this council of government was.
Yes, that sounds like a really big job. When did you become city manager? You were city manager for a couple
No.
periods?
So
Were you acting
I
in
was
that
Director
capacity?
of Public Works. I was assistant to the city manager
Uh-huh.
and served as city manager, well, if he was gonna be out of town over the weekend, he'd turn the job over to me.
What would that amount to? What kind of role did you play? What were some of your responsibilities in that position?
Well, looking after anything pertaining to the city work
Give me an example.
and,
What kind of problem might arise?
well, if any of the city equipment had a wreck or something that we needed to look after, or seeing that the city equipment was assigned to different jobs, and I know he'd be out of town sometime and turn it over to me, and I said, I hope to goodness the police department don't get involved in shooting.
You know, speaking of policemen, there's a photograph of you standing there talking to some officers, and I think there's some road signs there. What's that about? You remember the photograph I'm talking about?
I don't remember the
There's
conversation.
one, well, not the conversation, but was it about road safety, public work type activities? I'll have to take a closer look at that, but you're standing there.
I don't remember what we were talking about, but they wanted to have this photograph made. and
What was the
that's where-
occasion of the photograph? Was there some reason?
They just wanted to take a picture of it.
Huh.
I don't remember the specific occasion.
You've had so many photographs taken, I guess it would be hard. I'm sure that's not all of them either.
Oh, I got a box of them.
Yes. What was the occasion of the two people from your office putting that together, and what were their names?
Sue Scott
Mm-hmm.
was one, and John Hale.
They put that together for some special occasion in your honor. What occasion was that?
They had an appreciation of my 65 years of work. I had that over at the student center at the junior college.
TJC,
Yes,
Texas Junior College?
and they recognized or honored me that afternoon with the auditorium. One section of the auditorium was full of people that are friends and family and city people, some ex-councilmen, ex-commissioners, and ex-managers and so on that they honored me for 65 years of work with the city.
And that was to the year, which year?
1993.
1993.
And 65 years at that time, and they honored me that afternoon, and had a big audience there, people attended. And just at the end of it, the city manager was addressing the audience, and he asked me to come over there. And he said, I want you to help me here just a minute. And there was a cover over something, I didn't know what it was. He says, help me take this off. And he took that spread cover off of it. And there was a big television set and a camcorder.
Ooh.
And all that they had gotten together, and that's what they gave me at that dinner of appreciation.
That's great.
I have it at home now. I've been using it ever since. That surprised me. I never thought anything like that.
Really, after all that you've done?
And then when they swung the curtain back of another adjoining room, they had a table of food there about as long as this distance here, of all kinds of pickup food. You know, just people gathered there and talked. And
Was it overwhelming to see all those people there in your honor?
it was to me. You betcha, my wife was there.
I know she was. Did you offer a few words?
Yeah.
What did you tell them?
Told them I tried to. I don't remember what I said, how much I appreciated all them being there, and my years of work with the city I had enjoyed, and some things that we had accomplished over the years, and appreciated everybody being there. And after it was over, I found out some of my cousins were there from Bladewater that I didn't even know they knew about it.
That's
They were coming.
wonderful. So they wanted to make sure that all your old friends and family were involved in that.
I guess so. That was a surprise to me.
Was that soon after you retired, or was it just before? Let's see, 1993. This is 95. When did you
No,
retire?
that was appreciation of 65 years of service. I worked three years more.
Past that, really? From 1993? When did you actually retire?
It was 1993.
And
I
that
was 90 years old in July 1993, and I retired then in September. I worked till I was past 90.
did you have to get special permission to do that?
What kind of permission?
I don't know. I thought maybe they wanted to say, well, okay, 65 years, thanks so long.
Well, they gave me 50 years appreciation of a big cake they had down at City Hall, and invited a lot of friends down, and then 60 years they had another big feed there, and all the friends and family there. It was a surprise to me.
It was a surprise. You're being very modest, but I really want you to really be candid about it. I mean, think about it from all the 1920s. I mean, you made a really big mark. I mean, if you look at the photographs and you read about the different things you've done, you started off, you know, with lots of responsibility, and you became knowledgeable very quickly. Really, what made you so successful in this? This is a kind of small area, and you know the judges and the city councilmen and the fire chiefs, that sort of thing. I would think after a while, maybe, you know, you kind of wear out your welcome, or, you know, people get to know you too well, and they kind of like,
Yeah.
but that didn't happen with you.
Well, I tried to serve Tyler and do the best I could, and everything that they asked me to do or help do, or whatever I was volunteering to help
Just a
with.
volunteer to do.
Yeah, that's right. But we did a lot of things, accomplished an awful lot of things. We, as I said, when I started work at the city, the only paving was around the square and down to the depot. Well, of course, then we began to pave streets from just off the square all out through the residential section, and it took years and years to do all that.
Okay, I know
I
you
didn't
don't.
have charge of all that. We had crews, and my boss, he was actually the engineer, and since I had had 3.5 years of construction work, he appointed me, Director of Public Works, assistant to him as Director of Public Works.
But what I'm saying, there were other young men who probably had 3, maybe even 5 years of experience. They didn't get that opportunity. You had something, you brought something rather special to it, to the job. And by the way, Jack wants to ask you a question here while you think about that.
Okay.
I guess part of the reason I'm asking this question, but besides remembering you in my earlier days as Milton's father, my memories of you as a young adult are your work with the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Yes.
And that in itself is part of the reason they couldn't terminate your employment, because they had to replace you with about 3 people in order to get the work done. Another thing is that none of them would know what you knew, because you knew everything about planning and zoning in this entire town and all the history of it. You've been a part of it so long.
Yes,
Could you
there was no planning and zoning. In fact, that came about in 1927 or 8. The state legislature authorized creating cities to create a zoning and planning commission. And then we at city council here selected 7 men to serve on that in 1928.
Back to the 20s.
That was soon after the legislature authorized that function of the city. And I was here, and I grew up with the city planning and zoning. I worked with the city planning and zoning commission.
When you say you work with them, I mean, what does that really mean? What did you do?
Well,
Give me an example of a
We
day.
had to meet with them, and if we had an application come in for zoning a piece of property out here, commercial or residential, I was the one that they asked to study that and recommend whether we think it ought to be commercial or office district or whatever use might be, industrial. And
That's quite a decision to have to make, though.
and we worked on a city map, and we had some men that came from Austin up here a while and worked with us. And then after they left, I was detailed to kind of study the city and see what we thought ought to be industrial property and what ought to be commercial property and what ought to be office property and duplex property, multi-family apartment property.
Okay, now I see why Jack says it would probably take 3 or 4 people to replace you. How did you come by such special knowledge that would enable you to make that,
Well,
make the decision?
I just grew up here, we had no planning, and they created a planning commission, and I was the one that worked with them, and they worked with me on laying out the city, 7 men that they had selected. We studied the map and decided that we'd make this industrial and this commercial and this apartment and so on.
You know, there's an article in the exhibit about all the maps that you'd worked with.
Oh, yeah. And of course, they created this planning and zoning commission
When was that?
in 1928. There was no zoning in Texas, I believe, as such as we know it now. The Texas legislature authorized cities to create that kind of commission to recommend to the city how they thought the property ought to be used. And the city appointed 7 men to be the planning commission.
And you were part of
And I
that?
worked with them. I was a city representative, giving them what information I had or what they needed or what I could help with. So I just grew up with the planning and zoning. As it came about, I was the one to help with that.
I want Jack to follow up on that, because he's still being very modest, but I'm getting a little deeper insight into this as you question him about this. Again, because I think those are really important decisions that you had to make.
Do you know anybody else in the state that worked as long in planning and zoning in any other community as you did here? See, yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't. And I think that's a record. Paul Parker, my boss down in the planning department now, when I quit, he's still there. He gets National Cities magazine. And in that the other day, he was showing me an article of a man that had been mayor of certain city 47 years. and the article was headed, "Can you top this?" And then he sent in my name as working for the city for 68 years and 7 months, and it came out in this national publication.
I'd like to see that. I did hear about that. How do you feel about that article?
Well, it just stated what I did, how long I worked for the city. I was glad that I was recognized in a national magazine.
And you topped it by by a couple of decades or more.
I have a copy of it at home.
Well, you know, an example of your talents in working with people and how being truthful served you well is the fact that you, as in the work that you did with the planning commission, you were on the hot seat all the time. I mean,
Quite
you
a
were
bit,
called,
yeah.
I mean, you were called upon, and to work with the planning commission to make decisions that made fortunes and lost fortunes for people possibly.
Yeah,
And you had to keep the best interest of the city
yes,
in mind, and at the same time, you have to work with the community you were a part of. And you,
yeah.
I don't know of anyone in that type of a position that could have survived other than you, Mr. Arnold. You
Well
know, in any
stated.
community, this was one point. The other thing, can you share with us, there are bound to be, because, you know, I was a part of a family that would bring zoning requests to you. I mean, there are bound to be some fantastic stories
Oh,
of
yes.
the silliest things, the craziest things that happen, the biggest, some scenes maybe that happened down. What are some of your interesting stories related to that planning commission? Because you know, we would do, and people will come up there and they'll protest zoning under all kinds of circumstances. Sometimes people are honest, sometimes they're not. What are some of the interesting things
Well,
that
I'll
you
tell
remember?
you, I'll say we, I was representing the city, we and the people, applicants and concerned people, had some big fights up there at the council. I mean, arguments, they call it, you know. Somebody wanted to zone some property and to be a big group of people there against it. And they yell at one another, you know, and
How did you get through that? You know, to last a while.
well, I was there as a representative. Of course, the council was all in session, and I was there representing the city, giving them, the council, what information we had about the present zoning and what we thought it ought to be. The city of Tyler employed a planning firm when we first started this out of Kansas City, Missouri, to come in here and work up the plan for the city of Tyler. And they did that. They kept a representative here for about nearly 2 years.
And you worked with that person?
I worked with that person as
Who was that?
representing the city,
You know, remember the name?
Frank Blanford.
Blanford?
Blandford was the firm's name. I can't think of he worked for a large planning company
Out of Missouri.
out of Kansas City, Missouri. And city let a contract to them to come in and work up the plan for the city of Tyler.
I want to still kind of follow up on what Jack was asking you about some of those stories, because again, you had to walk a very fine line many times, I would imagine, with so many parties involved and their, as he said, their fortunes, you know,
Oh, yes.
involved.
There was a big crowd there, some of them
There-
for and some
yes.
of them against, you know, and
Were you ever stoned? You ever have your tires punctured?
well, not exactly. They all respected me. I was a man furnishing information for both sides. And
That's still hard to imagine again. To be able to walk that fine line, and you were not stoned.
Well, you
when
never
were
got angry. I
pelted.
don't ever remember Mr. Arnold being angry at any of it.
no, I tried to be the go-between the two sides, furnishing each side what information the city had.
So again, both sides had to trust you. then?
I learned to control my temper when I was a kid. I might just relate this. We lived on a farm and Dad had a bunch of hogs, and one summer he gave me what we called a little pig, and he told me, said, "That's mine now." says you feed him and look after him, and next fall we'll sell him. Well, we had a hog trough inside of just a little fence where they fed the hogs, you know, and they would all come up there. And so my pig was there eating, and another one come up, bigger one, and rooted him out of the way. And there was a 2x4 laying there, and I just grabbed it and hit that hog right across the hips. And he went off across the lot just dragging his hips, just like that, walking on his front feet. And I thought, oh my goodness, if I hadn't have done that. And he walked off out there a ways and straightened up. And I just thought right then, I'll try not to let my temper get away from me.
How old were you?
I was young, about, I hadn't gone to school, 6 maybe.
That's rather extraordinary. I don't know of any 6-year-olds today.
And then another thing, when I was a kid, I was building me a house. Dad had some old window frames and some lumber out there that he was stored. And I thought, well, I'll just build me a little house. And I was holding a piece of lumber up there one day and driving a nail. And I drove the nail and missed it and mashed my thumb. And I threw that hammer just as far as I could see. It went 2,000 or 3,000 feet out there.
Quite an arm.
And then I needed it, and I said, well, I'm holding this lumber and I need that hammer. Now I've got to go get it. And that's 2 things that I've helped control my temper all these years.
Those 2 things.
Yeah, those 2 things made me remember if I just hadn't have done that. And that's helped me control my temper for many years, since I was a little one.
Did you ever lose it, though, during any of those zoning battles?
No. I tried to hold myself about it.
Do you think you were really always fair?
Yes, I tried to furnish each side for and against the information that the city had that they needed to discuss these things.
So that means you had to rely on people, too, to trust the information you were gathering.
Yes. Well, there's information they needed to make certain decisions.
Who remains in who does the same general kind of work that you've done, who's lasted for so long? Anybody else near your record? I don't think so.
I don't
Jack,
think
can
so.
you think of? Because you said that national magazine, 45 was about it. And then you were able to top that by about 25 years.
Paul Parker, who was my boss as long as I worked, sent that into this national magazine, and there was a write-up in there about me. And it was under that, can you top this little section.
Quite an extraordinary career.
68 years and 7 months service with the city, continuous service.
All right, now Tyler's coming up, or I guess all Smith County, the sesquicentennial. Are you going to be involved in that at all?
I had a call a while back to be chairman of one of those boards. And it was a board more of an honor. There's a reason they call me, that it's not the board that's going to detail all this, no. I wouldn't get involved in that, I'm too old.
But I mean, you're going to participate.
Well, just on this board, they call it kind of an honor board.
That still entails some kind of responsibility, though, doesn't it?
Well, I won't have to do any of the detailed work getting all of that, no.
Well, what do you want people to know about it? I mean, you've topped it, you've been here, you've seen a lot of things get off the ground, so to speak, start up from the 1920s, and we're going towards the year 2000. Tyler's growing and developing, expanding. This outer loop, is that going to change this area very much, and is it going to be for the better?
Well, the outer loop is not going to affect Tyler because it takes off of I-20 way outside the city limits and goes way around too far south and comes back in near the airport. And I don't think anybody coming from Henderson going to Canton would find to take that long route going around that way.
So, on that,
It will
Basis
help
alone.
in segments coming from 155, cutting over to 110, cutting off out there instead of coming up to the present loop.
but how do you think that's going to impact Tyler and its development? What's it gonna do to the population, the traffic?
I don't think it will help a great deal. As I
gonna
said,
hurt?
nobody's coming way around and going west.
So it's not gonna,
But it will help in segments
those
out there.
segments.
See, from one highway going to another without coming into town and going back.
so do you foresee development along those
Well,
routes?
not in the near future.
Mhm. What advice do you have for city planners today? I mean, it's growing and changing. I've been here just a very short time, and I'm rather
Well,
amazed at the speed of change.
So anybody that's appointed on the city planning commission should become very interested in Tyler, where the growth is, where the population is, where the traffic is, and all those things that are needed to make a study of that.
To make a study of it, but the character of Tyler. You know, Tyler's unlike any other city. I guess we could say that about any city, but this from Tyler's perspective, I'm enchanted by many of the homes in the Azalea District, and the gardens are just fill me with joy in the spring. That's rather unique, and even though I'm a newcomer, I shudder to think that maybe that's going to disappear. Well, how do you think that can be saved,
Well,
or
I
is it
don't
worth
think
saving?
Like
things.
I don't think so like some of these large cities. Now, a city has a spirit of the people, and the spirit is a matter of cooperation and the projects that they develop. Tyler is a city of lots of churches and good people and good leaders of the city, of the town, of the business. It wouldn't work just to take the population of Tyler and transfer them with Salt Lake City. You see, it's altogether different, or Tyler and Michigan. The two different operations, two different characters, two kind of people, two different spirits.
The spirit of the city. Pause. Yeah, that's with Park Parliament. Is that on?
Well, what would happen, no,
Yeah,
I
look
need
at
to get
this.
my light on. Okay.
Minor detail.
Well,
It's
no,
on?
but see, there was a matter of even, yeah, it's on now. But there was a matter of what they were authorized to do and what the council wanted them to do, and then there's some things that they did that were beyond that scope. Because I think the council, if I remember, had said no zoning would be changed even if it was unreasonable, unless the property owner wanted it to, and they had to, and there had been some zoning things they'd done that they didn't agree with, and, you had a lot of folks probably to deal with during all of
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, you had.
Well, we had one or two planning commissioners on there that said, well, that's John Doe, let him do what he wants to with it. Well, of course, that wasn't the way to operate. It's a matter of what ought to be there and where.
But these ought to be there. Based on what?
Well, the zoning, if it was business or his apartment or if it's office district or whatever.
Well, you had a major part in Tyler developing in somewhat logically as opposed to, say, Houston. It
Yeah.
just happens. There's never been, never been any zoning or planning there is my understanding, and it just happens all over.
Yeah, of course, Houston controlled theirs by platting.
What does that mean?
In other words, somebody come in with 100 acres and it depends on how they platted it. And they would require them maybe to leave some vacant property along the main street. It wasn't zoning, but it kind of accomplished the same thing in some ways. Of course, they didn't have anything to keep John Doe from going out here and starting a little business in his house and that kind of thing.
Thereby bypassing some of the zoning regulations?
Well, they didn't have any. Houston didn't.
Oh, you're speaking of Houston now.
Yeah.
You are writing a book. You're planning to write a book. You've started collecting the materials
Yeah.
for your book. If you write this book, what can you tell us that someone else can't tell us?
history of Tyler continuously.
Continuously. So you have all the the key links.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you think it's going to take you?
Well, from now on,
Do you have a publisher?
no, I haven't gotten that far with it. I've just got some notes.
Well, I hope this videotaping will help you along, to that
Mhm.
particular goal. You certainly have an awful lot to say, and I hope that at some points that you take more credit, yourself. Others, fortunately, have been wise enough to recognize, your influence and your abilities, and have made good use of you. Do you think they're going to remember that lesson?
Well, a lot of people will. Of course, it's soon forgotten with many people.
You were talking about the spirit of Tyler, that, you couldn't switch Salt Lake City.
Oh, yes. City has a spirit. It depends on the community leaders.
What is Tyler's spirit?
Well, Tyler has a good spirit of development and cooperation among the business people and things like that. The county and the city work together good on different projects. Some cities get in trouble with the county and this, that, and the other, But we have never had that trouble here. We've tried to avoid that, and we have.
By knowing the rules.
Yes. As a city develops, it extends the city limits out and gets out in what has been part of the county. And the county might have had some particular reason for doing or not doing a roadway, this, that, and the other. Well, the two need to get together and work out the problem if there is any.
And again, the people part of it means that there are people getting together
Yes.
and working through those differences.
Cooperation, understanding.
Mr. Arnold, what do you see now for Tyler that is in jeopardy, that you hope, someone will protect? What is it about the city now that you really want to protect? You said that spirit. What is the embodiment of that spirit?
Well, it's a spirit of helping develop a community.
Okay, well, let's go back now. I'm saying, what do you want to protect? Okay, that spirit is there that's going to help you protect something. Is it the physical layout of the city?
Well, that is part of it.
The height of the building?
And part of it could be people that come into a city to disrupt the operation.
Okay, tell me this. Is there one thing or a couple of things you could say, oh, I hope they don't mess with that? What is it about Tyler that you say, I hope they don't?
One thing would be mess with the Tyler and their planning. Sometimes one group wants to take over and oust another in politics and development, and some things are not good for the city maybe.
But there is some structure. I don't know, maybe, let's see if I can make it a little more concrete. If we think about, say, Tyler, the square, when we think about the square, what is it about maybe the physical arrangement, maybe the size or the height of the building? What is it about the city that you say again, and you say, oh, I hope they don't mess with that part, but I want them to protect this? Is there something you want to protect, a physical thing in the city that you want to protect, that you don't want to destroy, torn down, and rebuilt?
Well, I hope that they respect our building code that we've had, which requires certain type of permanent construction, and some fellow don't go out here and just build up a building right quick that is not a permanent, what we call a permanent building.
Is that in danger of happening?
I don't think so.
Okay. What is in danger that you hope, won't collapse? What about the facades? maybe some of the historic buildings. Are any in jeopardy now?
Well, I don't recall right now the buildings around the square. Some people want to preserve them and others need to redo them.
Well, what are your thoughts about that? Then this will have to, I guess, be the last part of this. But there must be something out there that, I'm thinking about the firehouse, for example, you know, that was torn down in 1956. You said it wasn't very functional. It certainly was interesting looking, and you had a lot of fun there, but it had to go. Looking back on that now, are you sorry? Are you sorry
Well,
you didn't fight for it?
One thing that affected that was the present day location of the firefighting equipment. That wasn't the place for it right now, you see.
So there's no regrets there that, you know, it really had to go.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that you think, well, it really should go, but maybe for the character and spirit of Texas, we need to let that particular building stand? Even though it's, you know, it's old-fashioned, but we need to leave that structure. Can you think of any structure that maybe is outdated?
Well, the old depot is one, for
Okay.
instance, that
Tell us where that is.
that's down to the railroad on North Spring Street. There's been some that wanted to preserve it and develop it into some use. It's just there vacant, been sitting there for years. And there may be some other buildings around that I don't recall right now,
But that one in particular, you would say, well, it's not that functional, but let's keep it.
by the age and by the former use and historical society preservation that it has.
So that's one, you said, let's keep it. Can you name another one?
No, some of the older buildings, I don't know of any particular ones right now,
All right.
but some of them want to preserve all of the old buildings around the square. And of course, if they can do something with them and make them useful, that's different from just letting them sit
Just
there.
letting them sit there.
That creates a dead part of town.
All right, all right. So you are for life in these different areas of town. All right, Jack has stepped away for a minute. The camera's still on. Is there something, I know I've missed a lot of things, and I may even ask you to come back and fill in on this, but as we've talked this afternoon, is there something that you want to say that you didn't say? That you want people to hear you say?
Well, I hope that Tyler always has a development that's good for the city and having proper use at the proper place. And preserving some of the older buildings because of the history that they have, and that they will continue to keep up with the growth as it grows outside of the city now, and maintain a nice development, and not go out and just some fellow want to put up a warehouse and among a bunch of residences and that kind of a thing. We have an ordinance protecting that.
So you think Tyler's in good hands?
Tyler is pretty well controlled right now.
And you're glad about that?
Yes,
Is that going to carry us well into the 21st century?
yes, that's right. I hope it carries on over into the next century.
With those words, Mr. Arnold, Mr. A, the man of the city, I want to thank you very much. Thank you so much for cooperating.
Thank you.
Turn that off.
And I can't see up close.
Let me see if it's still.